While carriers are already well into building out their 40G networks, preparations for the move to 100G are well underway. But before this can happen, key requirements and milestones in the optical industry must be met. We'll hear from industry analysts and experts about these issues.
100G today is fully standardized technology. The standards have been completed by the ITU, by the IEEE, and then a lot of significant work has been done from the OIF in order to sort of fill the gaps in the standard to make it a complete technology. So with standards complete, we've started to see products roll out commercially and actually starting to be deployed by network operators, not just in North America, but in Europe and Asia, all around the world. It really is a significant success story for 100G, especially when we compare it to the very slow, staggered rollout we saw with 40G. I think the industry learned from a lot of mistakes, made corrections, and has really done the right thing in moving to 100G.
So Reliance Globalcom supplies both carriers and enterprises with high bandwidth. And so where the rest of the world, where the rest of the carriers see a lot of growth, we see that too, because the global carriers carry that bandwidth on our network. So the driver for us for 100G is just that global explosive growth on data transport and data traffic.
Well, a lot of what's driving our 100G demand is just basically the growth of our internet traffic. We are have one of the biggest internet networks in the world, and a lot of what is on that network that's also driving the growth is video over the internet. We have a big content distribution network that is distributed around the world, and there's so many volumes coming from content from websites, that's photos and videos that are out there now, that it's just driving enormous growth on that IP backbone that we have. So we actually have some segments on our IP network that are running in the dozens of 10 gigs right now, and without a 100 gig technology to roll to, then we've got that big management issue that we got to deal with a lot of different 10 gig links until 100 gig is available.
We see a need within our own network to have 100 gigabit Ethernet trunks in our own IP MPLS network. So that's a long way of saying we'll be the launch customer for that service in the long-haul DWDM network. So we're in the midst of testing out. We have two principal vendors in the LH DWDM space, that would be Infinera and NSN. We're in the midst of qualifying those platforms in our lab initially, and then eventually in the coming year, 2012, out in our network. And the first thing that we'll use this 100G long-haul service will be our own IP network between the P routers and our network. Okay? We expect very shortly after that to go into commercial offerings of 100G, both in the long-haul intercity regime, as well as in the metropolitan area. And we use Ciena and Cisco in that context, as well as the two long-haul vendors. So again, we've got some work in terms of certifying those vendors' 100G capabilities on the platforms that we operate, and that won't be until the coming year. So already, from a availability perspective, there's a number of electronics vendors in the transport area, some of which we use, thankfully, that have this capability now or will shortly within the requisite timeframes.
100 gigs still is not cost effective for us in comparison to 10 gigs. So we can turn up and acquire, buy 10 gig interfaces and buy 10 gig interfaces actually at a much lower cost than we can a single 100 gig. So what that does is that it drives you to balance then, well, what is the management gain that you have by eliminating those 10 gigs? Is there additional value in that? And we've really looked at that, and we're just not at a point where it makes sense for us to start converting all those 10 gig links to 100 gigs at the current price points. We've managed to scale the network in a way that uses a combination of Ethernet switching technologies and IP routing to create lag groups that are really very large, and we think that's going to be sufficient for us to continue to scale with our network until 100 gig really becomes more available and more cost competitive with 10 gig.
I think first and foremost would be cooperation amongst all the vendors in terms of what they're going to support. So pretty much everybody supports LR4 now. That should be interoperable because there's only a handful of vendors sourcing those modules, those pluggable optical modules. As we move into the less expensive, shorter reach, multi-mode interfaces like SR10, and there's another one with an MSA coming along. Let's just say a router vendor should be interested in that, as well as a transport vendor, even if those are two different companies. And they should have similar timeframes in kind of bringing these things to market. They should be options for us. It's a CFP, it should just work. The backside of the CFP just works in everybody's box, right? Between that and not keying the CFPs to a given, some vendors tend to like to say you can only use certain CFPs that we have certified, and frankly they charge a premium for those things. So let's not all try to enrich ourselves, okay, on pluggable optics. Let's realize that they're an impediment to the rate of adoption at the current state of affairs.
What's after 100G is the question, right? And so there's 400G, there's terabits, which will come first. So if terabits comes around the same time frame as 400G, that's where I would go, right? Because I think everybody here knows that the growth in bandwidth is just explosive throughout the world. And so that's where I would go if the timelines were about the same. But if 400 gig comes out significantly before a terabit, again, customer requirements and business drivers may dictate that we do that first.
Level 3 really has a lot of bandwidth demands. And so, you know, believe it or not, we would actually, if there was an affordable 400 gig interface out there today, we would probably use it and could use it. I mean, we have one router pair on our network that's running 48 10 gig waves today. So that already gets us over a 100 or 400 gig. So, but we're just not seeing, we still see that as way out in the future. We're focused on getting 100 gig to the point where it's cost effective, and then we'll start worrying about that next step.
It's not too early, in my opinion, to start thinking about 400G or 1 terabit, even though 100G itself is just starting to be commercially deployed. One of the major reasons for this is simply the fact that we don't even know what the next generation speed is going to be. Is it going to be 400G? Is it going to be a terabit per second? I think the industry needs to solve that issue fundamentally from day one, right now, start working on that. And then once we resolve that, then start figuring out how the components companies and systems companies are going to come together and start building technologies so that when we get to 400G or 1 terabit, we'll have a similar situation to what we're seeing with 100G, as opposed to repeating the very fragmented evolution that we saw.